It is a time for our keynote speeches. So it is my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephen Rasche, who came to us from Iraq, Ebril. He is a Vice Chancellor for International Relations of Catholic University in Ebril, the only Catholic university officially recognized in the country. And as Iraq has been experiencing its own refugee crisis, Dr. Rasche has traveled internationally to advocate for his country and highlight the contributions his university and the Catholic community have made there. And it is a real pleasure to introduce him as our keynote speaker today.
Thank you all for being here today, all of you courageous folks to make it out in this snowstorm for us. I've got a video to show you in a little bit here in a few minutes, and I'm going to set up for that. But as I do so, I just wanted to thank again the organizers, to thank Manhattan College, to thank the network. This is the second time that I've spoken. I did speak in Rome last year, and at that time it was quite clear to us that the unique nature of the network and the specific type of schools that it was gathering together really had some promise to deal with this situation of the global refugee crisis in a new context. Now, I'm speaking to you, just to be clear, I'm an American citizen. I'm a U.S. lawyer who got lost in Iraq some years ago, and that's a separate conversation. But I'm resident there in Iraq. My official status is as an employee of the Archdiocese of Ebril in northern Iraq, the Catholic Archdiocese of Ebril. And it's the Catholic Archdiocese of Ebril that founded the Catholic University in Ebril. In that context, I'm also the representative to the Nineveh Reconstruction Committee, which is a coalition of the three major Christian churches of Iraq involved in the return of the displaced Christians to their homes in Nineveh Plain. Coming to you from a conflict zone, our situation includes what we call IDPs, international or internally displaced people, and commonly when the discussion of refugees and migrants is discussed, that particular class of people who are displaced within their own countries, get left out. I don't think it's an intentional thing, it's just the way the nomenclature has developed. But amongst these 60 million, and I think quite frankly that number is low, but amongst these 60 million or so people that we speak about as being displaced in the world, a large percentage of them are actually still within their own country, but forcibly displaced from their own home. And not all of these people are looking necessarily to migrate or emigrate out of their countries. They're just looking to go home. And that's an area of study that, for those of you who were here, who were in Rome last year, I raised that topic, and I will continue to raise it. Certainly there are many situations in which the viability of people to stay in their own homes, in their own countries, is at least temporarily at issue. But that doesn't mean that we should simply give up on the people who have been temporarily displaced within their country, but have a real longing to go home. We have a predilection here in the West of assuming that moving here is always the best solution. I would submit to you that there are many reasons to say it might not be. The quality of life that some of these people have, certainly as far as the Iraqi Christians had in some respects, they were living not a bad life, and they would hope to return to it if they could. And I think that experience is not unique in the world, and we should make sure that we're open to that. And in our studies, and in our solutions that we're proposing, that we don't simply assume that the initial solution is always to help people leave their country. At a certain point, there's nobody left behind to rebuild, and that's hardly a global solution either. So I speak from that perspective. I'm going to show you a video here. The purpose of showing this video, a couple months ago, I spoke at the International Federation of Catholic Universities international meeting in Maynooth at St. Patrick's College in Ireland. And it was, I think, a 3-day conference, and I spoke on the last day with a panel of other universities, all from conflict zones, including the University of Bethlehem. But there were also some others from in Africa that had similar situations. We compared our notes before we took the podium about how many checkpoints did each person have to go through in order to get to work in the morning, and similar things like that. And what we decided at the end was that the realities of universities that are trying to operate in conflict zones are really common amongst themselves, but vastly different from the more detached observations of what to do in these countries. So what I thought I would do from this point on, having shown you what the reality is of these families and these students, is talk about some of the things that we face in terms of how do we go about trying to educate them, how to justify what we do, and how to help and move those things along. And one of the first things that's critical to understanding how we work in these conflict zones is the trauma that the people have been through. In the case of northern Iraq, it's a country that's been at war. I shouldn't say northern Iraq, but Iraq. It's a country that's been at war, essentially in one form or another, for most of the last 40 years. The students that we have, most of them know nothing other than war or blockade, and in these last years, displacement. So how do you deal with that? These people, many of these students are still suffering in real ways from PTSD. PTSD is an interesting thing. We talk about it a lot here in the U.S. in the context of returning soldiers, but for every returning soldier with PTSD, there's 10, 20, 50 civilians on the other end who are in the same place at the same time, being inflicted by the collateral damage of all the violence that's going on. And we tend to forget about that. But for us, it's really a threshold issue. When we start educating the students, are they in a frame of mind where they're ready to learn again? And what allowances do we need to make for that? And I would say as well to the greater education community, what sorts of allowances and understanding are we really making to that? Because whether your students are, as ours are, staying in the country itself, or whether they're immigrants and coming here to the U.S. or to the EU, if they're coming from this type of situation, they'll be dealing with that. They'll be carrying that trauma along with them. And the thing to bear in mind is that in many of these countries, the issue of psychological assistance is a thing that it doesn't really exist. In many of these cultures, it's a situation where that's just a thing that it is better not talked about. And so these things are just continually suppressed. And the people who've been impacted by it carry it along with them for the rest of their lives, as do many of our soldiers. But if you're a Western institution and you work we're going to be taking in refugee students. In my estimation, it would be incumbent upon you as universities to fully understand where are these students coming from. And that's something separate from saying, make sure they attend orientation. It's something very separate from that. It has to do with understanding what was the reality of this student and where they came from. And you should not expect or assume that they're just good to go. In our experience, this issue is drastically underestimated. And so I would highlight that for you. The other thing is the need for remedial education. The students coming from conflict zones, in most cases, will have had their education interrupted, most of them several times. So what does that mean? Should we assume that somebody whose resume, whose scholastic resume shows that they had X number of years of Y type of education means that it's all there? I think the assumption should be otherwise. Again, understand where the students are from. For us, nearly every one of our students has had their education severely interrupted, and so we have to deal with these remedial issues, and that involves a changing of expectation, not only for the university itself, but also for the students themselves. And to the extent that you're partnering or looking to help universities or schools in these conflict zones, you should understand that their time schedule is going to be significantly different in that regard. One of the pictures that we showed there was of a girl that was recovered at the end of the ISIS war, and she and her mother and grandmother had been living under the radar screen in a Muslim village in a remote area of Iraq, in an isolated house where they just never really showed themselves to anybody. The grandmother had gone into a stage of dementia, and the mother had simply gone mad. And the girl was left living with them, and as they were recovered, they were turned back over to the church to see if we could help them out. But that girl had not had any schooling at all for 4 years. She was nearly 11. So we have these sorts of situations are pretty common, and so the issue of remedial education is a real one to keep in mind, interrupted education. The realities of student expectations, I think this is another thing that for us in conflict zones we need to spend a lot of time on, and for our partners, our foreign partners, they need to be aware of it as well. And what do I mean by student expectation? And primarily, do they intend or hope to stay in their country and help it rebuild, or are they intending to leave? And it's really, again, a threshold question that you need to get at. If their intention is to leave, then that really gears what sort of education you want to try to give them in a different way from the students that intend to stay. So at our university, we're focused on those students who are intending to stay and help rebuild their country. For the students that come to us and they're hoping to leave, we provide other shorter forms of education that can help them do that. So it might be just English language, it might be a specific technical skill or something along those lines. But for us, we realize that this is a really difficult situation in terms of, do the students want to stay? Do they want to leave? And we're asked from the global community, the global Catholic community, what can they do to help? Which gets us into the next reality, which is what is the realistic role of Catholic higher education for our community, for our situation. What do I mean by that? Really, for the Catholic higher education community, as far as it applies to these students, do we view our roles as being advocates? Do we view them as being problem solvers? Do we view it as being in solidarity with them? They're complex questions, and within the West, we have a different set of pressures, obviously, that are facing us, as opposed to universities that are simply trying to stay alive and take care of the students on the ground. But I think these fundamental questions really need to be asked because they determine what we're going to do with these students. Again, are we trying to handle and solve a problem that exists primarily in the West, or are we trying to really affect a meaningful solution for the people on the ground there? I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about that's, I think, is a good corollary here, and that's the example of international aid and the way that international aid is dispersed in these countries. In viewing this situation over the last 4 years as it's applied in Iraq, what we found is that the international institutional aid often misses the mark in terms of helping these people. And there's been a lot of shifting over the last couple of years, even within the aid community itself, about what their priorities should be and how they should go about them. And they would ask us, well, what should our plan be? What should we be trying to do here? And our answer is always that you need to make a decision. Is your goal here to spend money and get credit for it? Or is it to preserve this community? In our case, to preserve the Christian minority community, the Yazidi minority community. And they're really two different things. Much of the international aid paradigm is based upon simply making sure you spend money and get credit for it. And whether or not it actually makes a meaningful difference to the people on the ground at the end of the day is often an incidental thing. And I think that within this network, it's a small group of relatively nimble actors, and you have the ability, especially where we're at our beginning stages here, to make some decisions as to whether or not our main purpose is to actually affect things on the ground or do something else. I can tell you from the perspective of the affected people on the ground that they know immediately whether somebody is there to actually help them or whether somebody is there to say, well, let's take a look at this situation and see how we can package it to our own benefit someplace else. The people know this instinctively. I would say that here, if we look at this and our group or the higher education community in the West looks at this and says, well, perhaps the international aid spectrum of services is not quite on the mark, that this is an area where we could actually do a lot of work together. We have raised this from the standpoint of something deserving of scholarly attention. We have raised this at very high levels within the aid community, within USAID, within the State Department, and other similar groups, DFID in the UK, with various groups in the European Parliament, about whether or not their aid dollars, their aid paradigm, is really effectively reaching the problem. And we've suggested that this is a deserving area of scholarly attention, and we have put forward our situation in Iraq and our university in Iraq as the ideal laboratory for anybody who's interested in pursuing this. We're being told that that there would likely be funding for this line of inquiry that would help provide more efficiency in the way that $8 are distributed. And to those of you who may have interest in this, I would hope that we have a chance to talk over these next 3 days. But we are right at ground zero for all of these things that have happened, and certainly more than willing to provide ourselves as an appropriate laboratory for that. Administratively, what are the realities that we've got for educational institutions in conflict zones? There's a number of things that we're forced to deal with on a daily basis: a lack of security, a lack of civil infrastructure, a lack of funding, a lack of national education policy, and there's really no sugarcoating of any of it for us. And what I would say to you as universities from the West, who may be thinking about assisting universities and schools in conflict zones, that you need to factor in the realities that do exist on the ground there for your partner. And it will require a different level of patience and perseverance from your universities, from your schools, from your staffs, if you are really intending to get something done. On the flip side, these universities in the conflict zone, such as ours, will not survive without help from people like you, without help from institutions like yours. They can't survive in their own little vacuum, and this help is desperately needed. I would encourage you, by all means, to engage yourselves in it, but I do need to be clear. It will require a different level of perseverance and patience from you. I'm not sure where we are on time right now. I haven't started early. Okay, good. So what I'd like to do, having told you all about the gloom and doom and difficulty of everything, I'd like to close on some more positive notes for things. As they apply to our university in these coming months, we will be opening 3 new institutions, scholarly institutions. We are accredited as both an institution of higher learning and as a research institute by the Ministry of Higher Education, both in Baghdad and in Ebril, in the Kurdistan regional government. And out of that, we'll be opening 3 new institutes: an Institute of Cultural Preservation, an Institute of Property Rights, which is a real issue. People who have been displaced and have been permanently displaced, what becomes of their property, what sorts of compensation and restitution should they be entitled to. We're not having to start from a blank slate on this. The international community now has history in dealing with these types of things over the last decades, most recently in the aftermath of the former Yugoslavian conflict. So there are benchmarks for us to go from, and we intend to build upon those, but we will be opening and are being funded for an Institute for Property Rights to deal with that in Iraq. And the third thing, third institute that will be opening is a Center for Religious Freedom. And we'll be working with the John Paul II University on that and several others. We're very pleased for that. Again, we don't think there's any place on earth that would be a better place to start for an Institute of Religious Freedom than what the situation is that we have in Iraq. The last thing that I would talk about is a thing relating to a lot of the news, the difficult news that we see here in the West, a lot of it having to deal with the church and what's going on. And I would simply counter that with what we see on the ground in the conflict zone of Iraq. And the thing to think about, especially from Catholic institutions, Catholic universities, about the impact of the work. In the field, it's the priests and the sisters and the members of the lay missionary community continue to make a profound impact for the better in these places, very far removed from the spotlight of the media and what's going on a day-to-day basis. The workers are out there making a profound difference in a way that reflects in a significantly positive way on the church. Some of you no doubt read Crux magazine, and we recently had an exchange with John Allen of Crux, the senior editor of Crux, who's a good friend to us, and they've actually, the folks from Crux have done an outstanding job of covering our situation in northern Iraq. I recommend strongly that if you haven't seen Crux, to go take a look at it. But we sent John an email a couple of weeks back, obviously up to here with all the news coming out of the U.S. conference and whatnot. And we just encouraged him, as we do others in the community, not to lose sight of the good work that's going on there, the good work that's going on, perhaps outside the spotlight, but nevertheless going on as well. I'll tell you one closing story on this. We opened up a clinic in the middle of the crisis, in the middle of the ISIS war, the St. Joseph Charity Clinic, and it's run for us by the Sisters of the Holy Cross of Menzing. You saw there was a photo of them. These are sisters from Kerala in India, and this clinic was funded by groups, Catholic groups from around the world. It was open to everybody during the time of the crisis. Muslim, Yazidi, Christian, made no difference. It was a free clinic, dispensing chronic medicines, doing prenatal care, all sorts of things. All you needed to be was a member of the refugee community, and you were in. And a couple months back, we're in the process now of taking that clinic and transforming it into a small hospital. And as part of that, we're engaging in conversations amongst different members of the community, the Christian refugee community and the greater refugee community in northern Iraq. And we had occasion to speak with a group of Muslim women about their needs for medical care, and without us prompting them, they said, "Well, if we have a real problem, we want to go see the sisters." And you know, those sorts of things, happen all the time. There's good work happening. There's good work being done by the Catholic community out there in the field. We think our university can build upon that. We think this group can build upon that. We encourage you, in these difficult times, everywhere around the world, to be positive. These efforts by small groups of people have profound impact in our work and in our Christian witness. And I encourage you, please, don't give up the ship. A lot of work to do. Thanks very much for your time.
My name is Bob Arbusi. I'm a graduate of Manhattan College, and I don't have the same affiliations as a lot of the people in the room. I'm sure I did have a volunteer experience with unaccompanied teenagers in Naples last year, so that kind of raised my awareness of, to some extent, of what's going on. But I hope to get a lot from the conference to find out more. But relating to your point about funding and uncertainties about whether, the large funding organizations are doing the right thing in terms of where the money is targeted, I what I did at the end of that experience last year around the holiday time is I found through the bank, I found a link which enabled me to make a donation directly to the agency that I work with in downtown Naples. And to me, that made me feel more assured that the money would go to the right place and for the right purpose. I don't know if that's something that other people could use, but I found very comfortable in doing it that way. That's all.
I think there's more of that coming. I think that that type of being able to donate funds is certainly on the rise. We see that.
Please stand up.
Hi, my name is Carrie Bystrom. I'm from Bard College, Berlin. Thank you so much for this inspiring talk and all the information that you shared with us. I'm very curious to hear a bit more about the curriculum that you're carrying out. You talked about the need for some remedial education in some cases and what the expectations of the students are. And I'd just love to know what areas you're focusing on, what are the areas of most interest for the students, particularly that very important group you reminded us of people who are committed to staying and rebuilding.
Sure. It's a good question. Our language of instruction is English, and we are building ourselves on a Western liberal arts basis. In Iraq, that's not the easiest thing to do. The history of education in Iraq is a rigidly controlled one, and so moving into these areas that we would accept as a normal part of a liberal arts education is a bit of an uphill climb. That being said, we have authority from the Ministry of Higher Education essentially to teach nearly all of the disciplines that you would find, for instance, here at Manhattan College. Now, having the authority to teach them and the ability to teach them, the student body that's ready to receive them is a completely different thing. We opened up in 2014 essentially out of a grant from the Vatican. It came to us through the Italian Bishops' Conference, but we received an initial grant which allowed us to buy the land and build some simple buildings. And so it's really only since 2014, 2015 really that we opened our doors. So our students, since our language of instruction is English, we found very quickly that very few of them actually had the ability to do serious college level study in English in terms of reading, writing, research skills, and these things. So we've developed a two-pronged approach, which is first, we have our initial group of students, and we're focused on a 2-year intensive remedial program to get them up to speed in teaching English. Within that, we have certain things that we can teach, accounting, economics, more math-driven things where the English language is not so critical. So we're teaching some of those things as well. But this is will take some time to develop the full capacity both of the students and of the faculty in terms of the undergraduate education. The second prong to that is establishing a community of scholars through these institutes, which allows us to kind of jumpstart the presence of scholars because they can be working on their research as well. So we're trying to do both of these at the same time.
I'll move to the front so that you see the microphone.
I'm Reza Ahari. I'm from St. Francis College and also a board member of Amnesty International. The stat that you gave, at one point there were 1.5 million Christians in Iraq, and now it is reduced to 200,000. What happened to, where are they displaced? Did they leave the country?
Yeah.
What are the linkages that you have with the ones that are in exile or emigrated?
So in 2003, marks the beginning of the war against Saddam that eventually deposed him. And at that time, there were as many as 1.5 million. Statistics are difficult to come by. There are some counts that have it 1.2, 1.3 million. But certainly in the decade or so before then, there were somewhere around 1.5 or perhaps north of that. Today, we say less than 200,000. Quite honestly, we believe that number is closer to 100,000 now. This is a year old. They're closer to 100,000 than they are to 200,000. Again, clear statistics difficult to come by. People are moving around. But in terms of where they've gone, the vast majority of them have given up and have left the country. They've simply been persecuted in too many different ways for too long a period of time, and they've given up. So they're in the diaspora right now. There's a percentage of them that are properly moved into new countries, primarily Australia, Canada, much larger, much to a much smaller extent the U.S., some of them in some European countries. But the majority of them are living in temporary displaced situations in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and other places in the Middle East. And the reason for that, the reason that they left Iraq and went to these other countries where they're not allowed to work, they don't really have places to live, they're just spending whatever savings they have left, is that they don't get onto the list of refugees eligible for immigration into the West until they actually leave their country. So they can be displaced, homeless, victims of genocide, but unless they cross a border into another country, they don't make it onto anybody's list. The really tragic thing about that is that if they were able to stay in their own country, they and still get on the list and say, look, we would still like to emigrate at some point. If they weren't forced necessarily to leave their own country in order to do that, there are much greater support mechanisms for them within their own country. They may not be ideal, they may not be perfect. They're certainly far better in most cases than the situation that they're confronted with when they jump the border and go someplace else, and then they're often waiting for 2, 5, 10 years, even more. But most of the people are in the diaspora right now. We do our best to keep track of them. There are some hopes, although I have to admit they're slim, that some of them might choose to come back if the situation showed itself worthy of it. But more likely, they're in the diaspora and will stay there until they find a place that will take them.
Thank you for your speech. My name is Diana Willis. I'm from the CARI Center, the CARI Institute for Global Good, the Center for Learning and Practice. And my question is related to CARI's, which is you talked about the special needs of refugee students, including trauma-informed teaching and social-emotional learning and other kinds of things. What is your approach, or what are you thinking about teacher training? Are you doing that? Is there a plan for a standard way of preparing teachers in that context?
So do you mean for us at our university or recommendations for people in receiving countries?
Both.
Okay, so for us in our university, it's a little bit different in that most of the people engaged in our university were also there during the crisis, and experience is the best learning. So we are able to speak to our students from a commonality of shared experience there that has some built-in tolerance for it. We would hope that when we have the time and space to do so, that we would be able to give our teachers some more formal training in that. The aid community has begun to really understand this, and so we're seeing some of that now, an ability to train people. But for us right now, I think the primary thing that makes it work for us is that shared commonality of experience. Our teachers can see it in the students when there's an issue, and they know where it's coming from. In terms of how do you then import that to teachers in host countries that need to deal with it, I think that's an area that really requires some real attention and consideration. It's a difficult thing to simply teach that, out of a text or out of a lecture. It's one of the reasons why in many of these talks, I show the video as well. I show the pictures. I could stand here and talk to you all day long, but if you see the pictures, you see the reality of what they had to deal with. It's a different thing. So it's critically required, and I do think that it will require, in terms of the education of the teachers in the host countries, a wide range of learning, and I would hope that in most cases there'd be an element of experiential learning to it, whether it involves short stays visiting with refugee camps or other things that you might do, spending time in resettlement centers or those types of things, to really spend time with the people themselves. I think it's an area that will escape a mere learning from texts.
I think this conference will be also a great opportunity to meet experts in many different fields. With us is Father Michael Smith of JRS, who I'm sure will be a great person also to answer questions about teachers training. And we have multiple wonderful experts, and I hope this conference will facilitate sharing those ideas in many different aspects of refugee and migrant education. Are there any more questions?
Hello everyone, I'm René Mikalev. I'm a Jesuit from Malta, and I teach in Rome. I was part of the team organizing the conference in some way or another, so happy to be here with you. My question is this, okay, do you already have some experience of collaborating with other universities on some concrete projects? What's your hopes and dreams in that atmosphere? And then if technology can be helpful, and to what extent in bringing together universities to assist and to give resources or contribute resources to universities in conflict zones. Thanks.
We do have a number of things already going on in concrete ways with a number of different universities, primarily in the world of Catholic universities. Right now, those primarily exist in the field of scholarships for students of ours who are going on for advanced degrees in order so that they can return and help rebuild the country and help be part of our developing faculty. So we have several universities in Europe that we're working with here in the U.S. We have students receiving advanced degrees at the University of Dallas, the Catholic University there. We have students at Franciscan University, Steubenville, and we have another 3 or 4 that we expect we will have students as pursuing advanced degrees in the coming year. So we've started there. Again, I spoke about these institutes. We think that the institutes, the development of the institutes themselves will provide the place where we can start developing this community of scholars. And we've had significant interest in that almost since day one. We found a lot of the established professors quite willing to take the risk and come to Iraq and get in touch with the great ancient history and culture that we have to offer there. So we're looking for that. I'm very glad that you mentioned that you're from JRS, because I have it here in my notes. I neglected to mention that as an example of some of the positive work going on. Particularly pleased that you're from Malta, because with our community in Iraq, one of the real important figures that was a real glue for our community was Father Joseph Kassar, a good friend of mine, who in fact led the Latin Rite masses for the expatriate community for several years. And JRS is an example, again, of this great work that's being done outside the spotlight without anybody looking for recognition or credit. They're just doing the work that they should be doing. So thank you for coming here today. I'll let Father Joe know that I had a questioner from Jesuit from Malta.
Thank you. No, I know Joseph Cassari was my superior in Malta, so I've known him for many years. Okay, I'm here more on the side of the Gregorian University, but there are some representatives of JRS who have the opportunity to speak, and I've had some experiences with JRS in the past. Thank you.
We will take one last question for Dr. Rasche, unless there's none. Let me thank you so much.